Hi everybody, my name is Kai Basu, I'm CTO of Covare. Today I have Josephine Smith, who is the Enterprise Application Analyst from Northrop Grumman with me for this webinar on the importance of process in IT Service Management or ITSM. Let me give a quick introduction of Joe. Joe is an Enterprise Application Analyst in the Northrop Grumman Enterprise Shared Services. She supports process improvements, projects, and configuration around SAP Financial Module and related add-on software, SAP Data Archiving, and the Covare implementation. In today's webinar, we have divided into two halves. In the first half, which is actually the shorter one, I will give you an introduction of Covare as well as the introduction to overall process and process implementation. But the real meat of today's webinar is actually in the second half, which Joe will be presenting. And she will tell us how she has actually implemented a very successful process in her organization using Covare. And we'll learn a lot of new things from Joe during that period. So let me start with the very first question is, what is Covare? So one way to look at Covare is it is a box of a number of different tools in the areas of application lifecycle management or ALM and IT service management or ITSM. In the ALM side, we have the requirements, issues, tests, risk, release, etc. And in ITSM, we actually have